My brother kicked me while I was pregnant. I was having trouble breathing. However, my husband, a federal judge, became silent after issuing his order. I'm Bella, and my brother Gabriel gave me a really strong kick to the pregnant stomach at my mother's 60th birthday celebration, causing me to double over and gasp for oxygen. He was unaware that Daniel, my husband, was not your typical man attempting to defend his wife and unborn kid. As a federal judge, he had the authority to issue warrants that would permanently alter Gabriel's life. Like all Saturdays in late May, the morning began as usual. By 8 a.m., the Denver sun had already begun to warm the air, and I could hear Daniel in the kitchen pouring his typical potent coffee while muttering something classical. I moved more slowly now that I was 6 months pregnant, but I felt well and powerful. As if ready to take on the world, our baby daughter was active, putting her tiny feet on my ribs. I slipped into cozy flats and put on a flowing emerald dress that accentuated my expanding belly. Mom had a great celebration today. I also wanted to look good, even though I had conflicting views about family get-togethers. Steam flowing skyward like morning prayers, Daniel emerged at the doorway with 2 mugs. His words, "You look radiant," came as he placed my decaf tea on the bedside table. When he grinned, the corners of his black eyes wrinkled. That similar look at his confirmation hearing 8 years ago, when I was a court reporter, made me fall in love with him. I never thought I would marry the youngest federal judge appointed to our white federal courtroom, the Byron, or that his solid presence would become my fulcrum at that time. I said, "Thank you," and accepted the mug with appreciation. "I'm nervous about today." Daniel grew serious as he perched on the edge of our bed. I pulled up the text on my phone and nodded, saying, "Gabriel's been texting you again." At 6 this morning, the most recent one had come. Another tirade on how, because I married a judge, I feel superior to everyone. The same Gabriel. Daniel's jaw tensed as he read over my shoulder. "Bella, this isn't normal sibling rivalry. Some of these messages are genuinely concerning." Although my brother had always been erratic, his rage seemed to be more targeted lately. Gabriel's animosity has grown since Daniel and I revealed the news 3 months earlier. He said that because I was now living in Cherry Creek rather than Lakewood, I had abandoned my roots and believed that I was too good for the Alvarez family. I didn't miss the irony. Gabriel drove a brand new truck, enjoyed twice-yearly trips to Cabo, and resided in a custom-built home paid for by the family's construction company. However, I had somehow grown too large for my britches. I said, "He's just jealous," but even as I was saying it, I felt inadequate. You know how he gets around family events. Daniel straightened his necktie. He made a small gesture that indicated to me that he was starting to think like a professional. "Promise me something. If he starts anything today, anything at all, we leave immediately." "It's Mom's birthday, Daniel. I can't just bail on her." His lips were soft and comforting as he kissed my forehead, saying, "Your mother will understand. Our baby's safety comes first." "I mean it, Bella. We leave at the first sign of trouble." I concurred. However, I secretly hoped that wouldn't happen. Gabriel was still my brother in spite of everything. We had grown up in the same small bedroom in our parents' small ranch home, constructed covert forts in the backyard, and endured Dad's long work weeks during a period of economic hardship in the construction industry. Some trace of that link must have remained. A fragment of the brother who used to protect me from the bullies in the neighborhood. It took half an hour to drive to Lakewood, passing through well-known communities where home values steadily declined with each mile. The celebration was well underway as we got into my folks' driveway. I could hear music and laughter coming from the backyard, and cars were parked on both sides of the street. Mom had transformed their small yard into a lovely space by hiring a mariachi band and renting white tents. Squeezing my hand, Daniel murmured, "Ready?" "Ready." We entered controlled chaos from a side gate. A minimum of 50 individuals gathered around tables heaped with cake, pozole, and tamales. Teenagers gathered close to the makeshift dance floor, while kids ran between the legs of adults. I was instantly taken back to my childhood summers by the aroma of grilled pork combined with roses from my mother's garden. Mom was the first to notice us. At 60, Teresa Alvarez was still a formidable presence, with her silver hair styled in a sophisticated updo and dressed in a deep crimson dress. Her arms were wide as she hurried over, her face beaming with a certain happiness that comes from being among relatives. Her words, "Meha, you look beautiful," came as she carefully embraced me, making room for my growing belly. And Daniel, so handsome as always. Daniel embraced her with sincere affection. Even though he was a professional, he had never treated my working-class family with any disrespect. If anything, he appeared more at ease with them than he did at political fundraisers or judicial conferences. "Happy birthday, Teresa," he replied, pulling a wrapped present out of his jacket pocket. "60 looks wonderful on you." She smiled and led us to the family table where Dad and his friends from the construction site were having a courtship. Despite being semi-retired, Manuel Alvarez's hands were permanently discolored by calluses and concrete dust, making him appear older than Mom. When he spotted us coming, he rose up, a sincere smile spreading across his aged face. "There's my successful daughter," Dad added, embracing me with an Old Spice and hard-earned money scent. "How's my granddaughter doing?" As soon as the baby made a powerful movement, I put his palm on my tummy and chuckled, kicking like she wants to be a soccer player. Dad's eyes grew wide with amazement. He looked awestruck by the wonder of pregnancy, even after rearing 3 children. "She's going to be strong like her mama." At that moment, I saw Gabriel across the yard, observing us. Despite the early hour, he was standing close to the bar setup with an unreadable expression and a beer in his hand. He held himself like a boxer waiting for the bell, and even from a distance I could sense the tightness in his shoulders. Lucia materialized by his side, her palm making what I knew to be a soothing motion on his arm. Over the course of their 12-year marriage, my sister-in-law had mastered the skill of controlling Gabriel's emotions, but I frequently questioned what the cost of her unwavering attention to detail was. She smiled brightly but strainedly as she waved at me. Mom said, "Let me introduce you to some people," without noticing the tension that was present. As she walked us around the celebration, she proudly introduced Daniel to family members and friends, who looked at him with interest and respect. Undoubtedly, a federal judge was not part of their typical social circle. Daniel, however, was gracious in his handling of each introduction, remembering specifics from earlier discussions and inquiring about their work. Everything went well for the first hour. While I selected a plate of food, Daniel and I found ourselves at a table with my cousin Elena and her husband talking about their children's plans for college. It was difficult to eat much because the baby was pressing against my stomach, but the talk was pleasant, and I began to unwind. Gabriel then came over to our table. He responded, well, with a certain sharpness in his voice that I recalled from arguments as a child. "If it isn't the royal couple." Daniel calmly looked up, but I saw his hand on the table come a little closer to mine. "Hello, Gabriel. How are you doing?" Gabriel said, "Oh, I'm doing great," as he took a huge gulp of his beer. "Business is booming, unlike some people who think they're too good for honest work." Gabriel's gaze stayed on Daniel, but it was obvious that the remark was aimed at me. Elena, my cousin, shifted uneasily and excused herself to see how her kids were doing, leaving us alone with the impending argument. "Gabriel," I murmured, "it's Mom's party. Can we not do this today?" "Do what?" he questioned mockingly. "I'm just catching up with my brother-in-law, asking about his important job where he gets to decide other people's fates from his fancy throne." Daniel didn't move at all, but I could tell that his attitude had changed. Having presided over controversial hearings for years, he knew how to maintain composure under pressure. "I understand you run the family construction business. That's honorable work. Your parents should be proud." Acknowledging Gabriel's success without accepting the bait for an argument was the perfect thing to do. Gabriel, however, had no interest in de-escalation. "Yes, some of us choose to remain faithful to our families rather than emigrating to wealthy cities and upscale neighborhoods." "Stop, Gabriel." My voice sounded harsher than I meant it to, attracting attention from tables close by. "You're acting absurdly." "Am I?" When Gabriel's gaze finally turned to mine, I noticed a familiar and sinister presence. The identical expression he used to have before his tantrums as a child. an unstable blend of anger and hurt that never ended nicely. For 3 weeks, you haven't called your mother. You are here in your fancy clothing, behaving as though you still belong, even though you missed Dad's doctor's appointment. My palm automatically went to my belly as I continued. I've been dealing with pregnancy complications. Following that bleeding scare, Dr. Chong placed me on modified bed rest. You always have an excuse. Daniel's voice was like a dagger slicing through the tension. That's sufficient. I noticed a change in Gabriel's expression as he returned his focus to Daniel. Although the resentment remained, it was now laser-focused on my spouse. Oh, the judge says something. How will you respond? Treat me with disdain. I will request that you distance yourself from my wife. Your spouse? Gabriel's laugh was unattractive. Long before she became your wife, she was my sister. My sister, who knew each employee by name, who used to assist Dad with estimates, and who vowed to always be a member of our family. Now observe her as she sits there, unable to handle a small discussion like a fragile flower. Our voices went farther than I would have liked in the unexpected silence after the mariachi band had ended their performance. Mom was coming from the other side of the yard. Concern wrinkled her face. I stood slowly and said, "Please, Gabriel. Let's discuss this in a private setting. You want to talk now? I never treated you that way after months of treating us like you didn't care about us." The profanity was so loud that it interrupted multiple discussions. Bella, do you know what's wrong? Do you believe that being married to a judge elevates you above the rest of us? Do you believe that the title of your beloved husband makes you superior to your upbringing? Daniel got up too. He moved with purpose and control. It's reasonable that you're upset, Gabriel. Marriage alters the dynamics of a family. However, you're going too far. Which line? I could smell the beer on Gabriel's breath as he took a step closer. The point at which I can't criticize my sister for being a fraud and for acting like someone she's not. Gabriel. Mom was still 20 feet distant when her scream echoed as she rushed in our direction. Are you curious about what is phony? I said. My own rage eventually came out. This entire victimization. Daniel and I are content because we are creating something together, and you are envious. I found someone who respects me, and you can't bear it. Deference? Gabriel got red in the face. When your husband despises your family, is that what you call it? He uses his fancy education to judge us while he sits there. I take it. Daniel has never passed judgment on anyone here. Simply put, he is too courteous to express his thoughts. However, I can see it in his eyes. He treats Dad's hands and our conversation at the party as though it were some kind of charming ethnic event. I could sense steel beneath Daniel's calm voice. Gabriel, you're projecting your own fears. I respect your family unconditionally. Fears? Gabriel gave a sour laugh. It's impressive that someone who believes he is God wears a black robe. That's sufficient. I moved in between them. My heart is pounding. You're embarrassing yourself, Gabriel, and you're intoxicated. Don't you dare reprimand me for embarrassing the family on her birthday, Mom. You are the one who fled and with the first wealthy man who showed interest in you. The remark struck like a blow to the body. Gabriel was treating our marriage like a business after 8 years with Daniel and everything we had created together. Tears threatened me, and I felt ashamed of my vulnerability. Remove that, I muttered. Why? Since it is accurate. Because hearing what everyone already knows is too much for you. Daniel stepped toward me. His presence is protective. We're heading out. Yes. Take off. Gabriel yelled. You're skilled at that. Fleeing as reality sets in. I turned to leave. Daniel softly touched my lower back. Gabriel wasn't done, though. Do you know what I believe? His words reverberated over the suddenly silent yard. I believe you intentionally got pregnant. When he grows weary of playing home with his little Mexican project, trap the judge with a baby to prevent him from leaving. The curse-like words lingered in the air. The party had entirely stopped talking now, and I could sense that dozens of people were watching us. Mom's palm was pressed to her chest, and she had turned pale. Dad's face was black with rage as he pushed through the gathering. You apologize to your sister now, Gabriel Alvarez. Mom ordered, but her voice wavered. Gabriel disregarded her. With an intensity that made my skin crawl, he was staring at me. Is that all there is to it? You discovered a way to permanently lock him down. In order for him to continue acting as though you are a part of his universe, get yourself knocked up. Something broke inside of me. A flood of utter wrath sprang to the surface after 8 years of putting up with Gabriel's brutality, justifying his actions, and hoping he would someday accept my decisions. I said, "You're pathetic," and my voice could be heard clearly throughout the yard. "It's incredibly pitiful. You're miserable, so you can't bear that I'm happy. No one could love the resentful, irate guy you've turned into. Therefore, you can't accept that Daniel loves me." After going white, Gabriel read, "Gabriel, you little _." When Dad finally got to us, his yell broke the tension, but it was too late. For a brief moment, Gabriel sprang forward. I was afraid he was going to push me or grab my arm. Rather, his knee sprang up quickly and forcefully, making contact with my round stomach with such power that I lost all ability to breathe. I doubled over and gasped as pain erupted in my abdomen. The infant, who had been moving around all morning, became motionless. Daniel called Gabriel's name, and I heard it. Heard my mother yell. As Dad threw Gabriel to the ground, I heard bodies hitting. The frightful silence, however, felt far apart from all of that. I fell on my knees on the grass in my womb. I tried to will my daughter to move by pressing my hands protectively over my belly. "Baby girl, please. Kick me, please. Tell me you're okay, please." In an instant, Daniel was by my side, his hands soft on my shoulders. I spoke with Bella. "Where's the pain?" "The infant?" I allowed a gasp. "Daniel, she's not moving. She is not moving." His voice was cool and collected, but his face turned white. "Right now, we're heading to the hospital." All around us, there was anarchy. Gabriel was struggling and yelling unintelligible charges while Dad held him on the ground. Mom was sobbing and repeatedly apologizing. With her palm over her mouth in shock, Lucia stood motionless close to the bar. Daniel carefully assisted me in standing up, bearing the majority of my weight on his arm. Tom summoned our neighbor, who had been observing the entire event. "Are you able to move your vehicle?" Tom sprinted for his keys, saying, "We have to get to Presbyterian Hospital right away." I turned to face Gabriel again. Dad had pulled him to his feet, but Gabriel's expression was unrepentant. If anything, he appeared content, as if he had at last received the response he desired. He spat out, "This is what you get," as he resisted Dad's hold. "This is what happens when you think you're better than your family." Daniel came to a halt and slowly turned to look at Gabriel. My kind husband changed into someone I had never seen before in that instant. With the combined strength of the U.S. government and 20 years of legal knowledge, the federal judge came out strong. "Gabriel Alvarez," Daniel remarked in a tone of total command, "you just assaulted a pregnant woman in a crime in front of 50 witnesses. My expectant spouse." For the first time, Gabriel's expression wavered. There was a glimmer of doubt on his face. Daniel went on, his words exact and purposeful. "I will kill you as a federal judge who witnessed you perpetrate a horrific crime against a pregnant lady, not as Bella's husband. Once we return from the hospital, and I am certain that my wife and daughter are safe." There was utter silence among the group. Sensing the seriousness of the situation, even the kids had ceased playing. Gabriel remarked, "You can't threaten me." Daniel grinned with the coldest expression I had ever seen on his face, yet his voice lacked conviction. "I don't mean to threaten you. I'm outlining what will occur next. The FBI will look into it. It will be prosecuted by the U.S. attorney. And I'll make sure you receive the harshest punishment possible under federal law by using every legal tool at my disposal." Without further word, Daniel led me to the edge of the yard where Tom's automobile had appeared. Gabriel began to yell once again as we were leaving, but Dad's voice interrupted him with a decisiveness that brooked no resistance. Dad said, "You're done," to his kid. "You're done with this family." Daniel held my hand in the car as Tom sped cautiously toward the hospital. I continued to rub various areas of my belly and speak softly to the baby while I waited for her to move. The quiet in my womb felt unnatural, foreboding, like the quiet before a destructive storm. Daniel mumbled, "She's going to be okay," but beneath his assurance, I could hear the worry. I muttered, "What if she's not? What if Gabriel? Don't think like that. We're going to get you checked out, make sure everything is fine, and then we're going to handle this properly. I glanced at my husband's profile as he fixed his determined gaze on the window. Gabriel was unaware of what he had let loose. He had been considering Daniel to be simply another affluent outsider that he could disregard or threaten. Daniel Carter, however, was more than a federal judge. He was a man who had just witnessed an assault on his pregnant wife. Additionally, he had the ability to hold Gabriel accountable in ways that my brother could not even fathom. Local law enforcement could only imagine the resources available at the federal courthouse. Daniel had contacts across the legal system, including federal prosecutors, FBI field agents, and other judges who would consider an attack on a co-worker's family to be an attack on the judiciary as a whole. Gabriel felt that by snapping at me, he had achieved something. Instead, he simply declared war on one of the most influential judicial systems in the United States, and they were going to destroy him. As Dr. Laura Kim connected the fetal monitor to my abdomen, the Presbyterian Hospital emergency room hummed with controlled intensity. I shivered from the icy gel, but not as much as from my daughter's unbroken quiet. Daniel put his hand around me as he sat next to the examination bed. We were both looking at the monitor screen, hoping to see some life. Dr. Chong whispered softly, "There," as he adjusted the sensor. The quick whooshing sound of a heartbeat suddenly filled the room. Defiant, strong, and steady. "Your baby girl is fine, Bella. Heart rate is perfect. Movement is normal." She was probably just resting after the trauma. I was so overcome with relief that I burst into tears. Daniel, whose eyes were full of unshed tears, bent over and kissed my forehead. Whispering, "She's okay," he said. "Our daughter is okay." As she examined the patient further, Dr. Chong looked for any indications of problems or placental abruption. Throughout the entire pregnancy, she had served as my obstetrician, a tough woman in her 50s who had seen every possible complication during the hundreds of infants she had delivered. I had always been reassured by her cool expertise. But reassurance wasn't enough for me today. I required assurance. She stated, "The impact site is already bruising," as she prodded my abdomen gently. "You're going to be sore for several days, but I don't see any signs of internal injury. However, I want to keep you for observation overnight. Any trauma to a pregnant woman at your stage requires monitoring." With the exact tone he used while questioning witnesses, Daniel inquired, "Is there any chance of delayed complications?" "There's always a small risk with any abdominal trauma, but your wife is young and healthy. The baby appears completely unaffected. We'll do another ultrasound in the morning before discharge, but I expect everything to be normal." Daniel took out his phone and entered the corridor as Dr. Chong went off to set up the overnight room. I could hear bits and pieces of his talk through the half-open door. Federal prosecutor, counts of assault, statements from witnesses. Like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't quite ready to put together, the words drifted by me. His face had changed to one I knew from court appearances by the time he returned. Daniel Carter, the judge, was strategizing. He leaned back in the chair next to my bed and stated, "I've contacted Anthony Delgado at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He's going to open a federal investigation into Gabriel's assault." I said, "Federal? Why not just local police?" "Because Gabriel assaulted the wife of a federal judge, which makes it a federal crime under multiple statutes. Anthony's already dispatched agents to interview witnesses at the party. By tomorrow morning, they'll have sworn statements from everyone who saw what happened." I was shocked by how effective it was. The federal law enforcement apparatus was already in motion less than 3 hours after Gabriel's knee made contact with my abdomen. Although I was aware that Daniel had a lot of power, it felt unreal to see it used for my benefit. What happens next? Daniel grasped my hand and ran his thumb over my palm in soft circles. "Gabriel gets arrested. Probably tomorrow morning, Anthony will seek federal charges for assault on a federal official's family member, which carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. The question, 20 years, hovered between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was prepared to cross. Even though Gabriel was erratic and nasty and had recently attacked me during my pregnancy, he was still my brother. 20 years seemed like an eternity. He nodded gravely, his dark eyes saying, "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you doing this because it's the right thing to do legally, or because you're angry about what Gabriel did to me?" He seemed surprised by the question. He remained silent for a while, thinking through his response with the same meticulous attention to detail that he applied to court rulings. "Both," he finally said. "Yes, I'm furious that someone hurt you and threatened our daughter. But that's not why I called Anthony. I called him because Gabriel committed a serious federal crime in front of 50 witnesses, and federal crimes require federal prosecution. If I didn't report this, I'd be failing in my duty as a judge. But you have influence over how aggressively they pursue it." His voice grew softer as he said, "I do, and I'm going to ask them to pursue it very aggressively. Bella, what Gabriel did wasn't a moment of poor judgment or a family argument that got out of hand. He deliberately attacked a pregnant woman because he was angry about words. That's not just assault. It's a glimpse into someone capable of extreme violence when he doesn't get his way. In the instant before he hit me, I imagined Gabriel's face. The icy delight, as if he had planned it. The fact that, even as Dad was holding him on the ground, he had later displayed no regret. After he struck me, I mutely remarked, "He looked pleased." Daniel's mouth clenched. "Exactly. Someone who takes pleasure in hurting pregnant women is someone who needs to be stopped before they hurt someone else." I seemed to be moved to the overnight observation room by a nurse. I saw glimmers of the outside world through windows as they pushed my bed around the hospital hallways. Ordinary individuals going about their Sunday night activities, not knowing that their brothers were facing 20-year jail sentences or that federal prosecutors weren't analyzing their lives. The observation room, which was intended for rest and recuperation, was calm and poorly lit. Daniel took a seat in the recliner next to my bed as I attempted to take in everything that had transpired. My main worry 12 hours ago had been if Mom would enjoy the birthday present we brought. I was now resting in a hospital bed as my relatives were being questioned by FBI officers. I inquired, "Do you think Mom and Dad knew? How bad had Gabriel gotten?" Daniel thought about it. "Your mother looked genuinely shocked when it happened. Your father's reaction suggests he's been worried about Gabriel's behavior for a while. Dad had tackled Gabriel so fast, as if he had been waiting for something to happen, and I recalled that, as well as the finality with which he informed Gabriel that he was done with the family. A father who was taken aback by his son's behavior would not have said those things. A man who had been dreading this moment said those remarks. I should call them. Let them know the baby's okay. I already did. Your mother was beside herself with worry. I assured her that both you and the baby are fine and that Gabriel will face appropriate consequences for his actions." "What did she say?" Daniel paused. "She asked if there was any way to resolve this within the family without involving law enforcement." I wasn't surprised by the request. Gabriel's mother had been making excuses for his actions all of his life, calming down his angry outbursts and persuading others to give him another chance. She probably didn't think it was feasible that this time would be different. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that Gabriel crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. That some actions have consequences regardless of family relationships. Sleep came in fits and starts during the night. I would always wake up with a start, reaching for my stomach to feel for movement. My anxieties were eventually allayed by the baby's comforting movements, which appeared to detect my anxiety. I felt better physically by morning, but my emotions were still raw. At 7 o'clock, Dr. Chong arrived with the ultrasound machine, moving confidently and efficiently. Our daughter was seen on the screen in exquisite clarity, with her small hands moving close to her face and her heart pumping steadily and powerfully. "Everything looks completely normal," declared Dr. Chong. "No signs of trauma. Normal fluid levels. Perfect positioning. You could go home this morning." She drew Daniel aside for a private discussion as she completed the discharge paperwork. She spoke with remarkable gravity and handed him many documents, but I couldn't hear what she was saying. Daniel's face had hardened into something I had never seen him look like before when they were done. I inquired, "What was that about?" Daniel held up a manila packet full of papers as Dr. Chong walked away. "Medical documentation of your injuries, detailed photographs of the bruising, expert medical testimony about the potential risks to you and the baby. Everything Anthony Delgado needs to build an airtight case. It struck me as being meticulous. Daniel had been building a case that would follow Gabriel for the rest of his life, while I had been concerned about my daughter's welfare. Every detail is recorded. All witness statements are documented. Every bit of evidence was kept safe. Dr. Chong also gave me this, Daniel continued, passing a business card to me. A therapist with expertise in providing pregnant women with trauma treatment. She thinks it might help you process what happened. I gazed intently at the card. Counseling for family violence, Dr. Amanda Foster, Ph.D. The phrases seemed alien, like they were from someone else's life. I never considered myself to be a victim of domestic abuse. My obnoxious brother Gabriel had always been too loud, too rough, and too irate. However, I became aware that perhaps my normal wasn't really normal after noticing the purple bruise that was spreading across my stomach. On the way home, we passed the federal courthouse where Daniel worked in downtown Denver. I no longer saw the edifice as an abstract representation of justice, but rather as a weapon aimed at my brother's future. Prosecutors were constructing a case inside those confines that would ruin Gabriel's life. Daniel noticed that I was looking at him and inquired, "Are you having second thoughts?" "I don't know. Maybe. It feels so huge." "It is huge. But Gabriel made it huge when he decided to assault a pregnant woman. You didn't choose this, Bella. He did." After the sterile atmosphere of the hospital, our home in Cherry Creek felt like a haven. After assisting me with cushions and blankets on the couch in the main room, Daniel vanished into his home office to make phone calls. The same tone he employed for complex matters was audible in the low murmur of his voice as he discussed federal statutes and legal methods. My phone rang at about noon. I paused before responding as Mom's name came up on the screen. I couldn't ignore her forever, but I wasn't prepared for more family trouble. "Ma, how are you feeling?" she asked, her voice heavy with concern and what sounded like fatigue. "Better. The baby's fine. We're both going to be okay. Thank God." I was so scared. I didn't sleep at all last night thinking about what could have happened. I inquired, "Where's Gabriel?" A long silence. "He left last night. Lucia is staying with her sister. She's very upset about everything." I questioned if Lucia was angry at Gabriel's acts of violence or at the impending repercussions for him. She had most likely learned to prioritize damage control over moral outrage after 12 years of marriage. "Mom, I need to ask you something. Has Gabriel ever hit anyone before?" "Hit Lucia?" "Hit you?" Another pause, this one longer. Mom's voice was hardly audible above a whisper when she spoke again. "There have been incidents. Nothing like yesterday, but yes, sometimes when he gets very angry, he throws things and pushes people. Last year, he grabbed Lucia's arm so hard it left marks." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "What were we supposed to say? That your brother has a temper? You already knew that. And it's not like he was beating anyone. He was just losing control sometimes." I was heartbroken by the justification in her voice. Mom had been downplaying Gabriel's actions for so long that she had forgotten the difference between normal and abuse. Losing control wasn't the only thing involved in grabbing someone firmly enough to leave marks. It was an attack. "Mom, what Gabriel did yesterday wasn't just losing control. It was deliberate. He looked right at my pregnant belly and kicked it as hard as he could." "I know, Mega. I know. That's why your father told him to leave. But maybe if we all sit down and talk, if Gabriel apologizes properly, maybe this doesn't have to involve the courts." "It's too late for that. Gabriel committed a federal crime. The FBI is already investigating." "The FBI," Mom said, her voice breaking. "Bella, he's your brother. Families should handle family problems. Families should protect each other. Gabriel chose to attack me instead." I felt the weight of conflicting allegiances as I sat there looking at my phone after we hung up. Gabriel was my brother, and Mom was right. 32 years of history, innumerable memories, DNA, and formative childhood experiences were all shared by us. Daniel, however, was also correct that some boundaries could not be breached. It was about 2 o'clock when the doorbell rang. I could see 2 individuals wearing dark suits with badges via the peephole. Agents from the FBI, as Daniel had said. When I called for him, He came out of his office without seeming shocked that they had come. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Special Agent Naomi Park, and this is Special Agent Robert Vega. We're investigating the assault that occurred yesterday at your mother's birthday party." Agent Chun had keen eyes and a professional demeanor, and she was younger than I had anticipated, likely in her early 30s. Agent Torres was older, perhaps in his late 40s, and had a face that looked like it had been worn from years of handling challenging cases. After Daniel invited them into our living room, they set up their positions with well-honed efficiency. Agent Torres opened a big notebook, and Agent Chun took out a digital recorder. "We've already interviewed several witnesses from yesterday's incident," Agent Chun said. "We have consistent statements about what occurred, but we need your account of events starting from when the confrontation began." I went over every detail I could recall with them for the next hour. Gabriel's texts in the morning, the party's tension, the growing dispute, the instant he hit me. The agents asked specific inquiries, sometimes asking for further information or clarification. Agent Torres inquired, "Had your brother ever been physically violent with you before yesterday?" I gave it some serious thinking. "Not directly, but he's always been aggressive and intimidating. When we were teenagers, he used to corner me during arguments, get right in my face, and yell until I backed down." "Any witnesses to those incidents?" "Usually just family, and they tended to treat it as normal sibling rivalry." As Agent Torres persisted in questioning, Agent Chun took notes. "What about threats? Has Gabriel ever threatened you or your husband?" "He's made comments about Daniel. Nothing explicitly threatening, but definitely hostile. He resents that I'm married someone successful. We'll need copies of any text messages or emails from Gabriel, particularly recent ones." Agent Chin took a few minutes to take pictures of Gabriel's communications after I turned over my phone. In context, some of them appeared worse, particularly the ones that said Daniel was taking advantage of me and questioned my allegiance to the family. Agent Torres remarked, "One more question," as they were about to depart. "Are you aware of any other violent incidents involving your brother? Other victims who might be reluctant to come forward?" The question struck me like a blow to the body. I considered the times I would have written off as typical family dysfunction, the way Lucia always seemed to be controlling Gabriel's emotions, and Mom's admission that Gabriel had gripped Lucia so violently that it left marks. "You should talk to his wife, Lucia, and maybe some of his employees. Gabriel runs a construction company, and he's always had problems with authority. Daniel saw me sitting on our back terrace, gazing at the mountains after the agents had left. It was a beautiful blue Colorado sky, the kind of ideal spring day that normally made me feel hopeful. It felt like ridicule today. He took a seat next to me and asked, 'How do you feel?' Like I just signed my brother's death warrant. You didn't sign anything. You told the truth about what happened. It's the same thing. You know what 20 years in federal prison will do to someone like Gabriel." Daniel was silent for a while. "Do you know what Gabriel could have done to our daughter yesterday?" Dr. Chong explained the risks: placental abruption, premature labor, and brain damage from oxygen deprivation. "Your brother could have killed our child, Bella." Between us, the words weighed heavily. I hadn't completely comprehended how close we'd been to catastrophe because I had been so preoccupied with the instant relief of hearing our daughter's heartbeat. Our baby's life might have ended before it really started because of Gabriel's outburst. "Daniel, I know you're struggling with this," he added. "Gabriel is your brother, and loyalty to family is one of your best qualities, but loyalty can't extend to protecting someone who's dangerous. What if I'm wrong? What if this was just a terrible moment of poor judgment and not who Gabriel really is? Then why did your father immediately tell him he was done with the family? Why did your mother admit there have been other incidents? Why did Lucia leave him and go stay with her sister?" I was forced to face what I had been avoiding by the inquiries. Gabriel's assault had not been an isolated incident. A pattern that had been developing for years was intensified. Simply put, I had been too close to view it well. Daniel got a call from Anthony Delgado that night. As I pretended to read a book, trying to pick up tidbits of the conversation, they talked for almost an hour. Daniel's face was serious when he eventually hung up. "Gabriel's been arrested. They picked him up at a motel in Colorado Springs about 2 hours ago." I felt my gut tighten. What happens now? Arraignment tomorrow morning. Anthony's asking for no bail, arguing that Gabriel poses a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. No bail means he stays in jail until trial. Potentially, given the federal charges and the nature of the assault, it's likely the judge will agree. I made an effort to picture Gabriel in a federal detention facility, deprived of his autonomy and autonomy. Even as a child, he had never coped well with confinement. He used to go into hours-long screaming fits during timeouts. Daniel said, Anthony also told me something else, with caution. When they arrested Gabriel, he made some statements. Threats. Actually, what kind of threats? Against you. Against me. Against our daughter. The agents recorded everything, which means those threats will be added to the charges against him. Even though the nighttime air was warm, I felt chilled. What did he say? Daniel paused. I don't think you need to hear the specifics, but Gabriel made it clear that he blames you for his arrest and that he intends to make you pay for it. More terrifying than Gabriel's initial attack was the thought that he was actively plotting retaliation while incarcerated. That had been rash, motivated by rage and intoxication. Threats from jail, however, implied preparation and calculation, a degree of malice I had never associated with my brother. Are we secure? Anthony will set up extra security measures, even though Gabriel is currently in federal custody and won't be leaving anytime soon. As a precaution, I noticed that I kept checking the locks on our windows and doors as we got ready for bed that evening. The home that had previously seemed secure suddenly felt weak and exposed. I jumped at every sound. All the shadows appeared to be dangerous. As I stood at our bedroom window, Daniel saw that I was nervous and put his arms around me from behind. He is no longer able to harm you. He mumbled something in my ear. I will not allow him to. However, I couldn't get rid of the thought that Gabriel's arrest was only the beginning as I lay awake and listened to Daniel's steady breathing. My brother had always been spiteful and would always find a way to punish those who disobeyed him. His body might be in federal jail, but his anger would not be. And a voice in the back of my mind hinted that Gabriel's true retaliation was still to come. On Monday morning, the downtown Denver Federal Courthouse was bustling with activity. Despite being married to a federal judge for 8 years, I had hardly ever been to a criminal court hearing as I passed through the metal detectors next to Daniel. It felt different today. I wasn't an onlooker when I entered Gabriel's arraignment today. I was the victim. We encountered Anthony Delgado outside courtroom 3B in the hallway. His face was soothing but professionally serious. Anthony, who was Gabriel's case's associate U.S. attorney, exuded the calm assurance of someone who had prosecuted hundreds of federal crimes. Over the years, he and Daniel had collaborated on a number of cases, and their regard for one another was clear. How are you feeling, Bella? With sincere worry, Anthony inquired. Anxious. I acknowledged that I had never experienced something similar. That is quite typical. The proceedings for today should be simple. After being officially charged, Gabriel will make the case to be held without being released on bond. Unless the court directly asks you a question, which is uncommon, you are not required to speak. Daniel put a hand on my lower back for protection. We walked into the courtroom, which was smaller than I had anticipated and had tidy rows of wooden benches facing the judge's bench. A couple of reporters were seated in the rear, prepared with their notebooks. Media attention was often drawn to federal offenses involving judicial families. Gabriel was already sitting next to a court-appointed lawyer at the defendant's table. I failed to recognize. I was shocked to see my brother wearing chains and an orange jumpsuit. Somehow, he appeared smaller, lessened by the burden of federal accusations and the institutional attire. His eyes instantly met mine as he looked around the courtroom. There was nothing but hatred in his eyes. No sign of the brother who helped me with my algebra homework and showed me how to ride a bike. This person saw me as an adversary who needed to be eliminated. Daniel tensed next to me, so I went closer out of reflex. As Judge Catherine Doyle walked into the courtroom, the bailiff said, "All rise." Over the years, I had met Judge Hricks at a number of court events. She had a reputation for being direct and especially intolerant of abuse against women and children. Mark Reynolds, Gabriel's hard-looking public defender, asked for a private meeting with his client right away. Over the course of the many minutes of the hushed chat, Gabriel grew more and more upset. He raised his voice high enough for pieces to fall to our chairs. Spiteful prosecution, family conflict, and federal overreach. Following Judge Rice's call for order, the official arraignment started. Anthony Delgado's voice reverberated throughout the courtroom as he stood to read the charges. Gabriel Alvarez versus the United States of America. The defendant is accused of violating Title 18, Section 115 of the U.S. Code by assaulting a member of a federal official's immediate family. In addition, the defendant is accused of violating Title 18, Section 115 by threatening a federal official and his family. In addition, the defendant is accused of violating Title 18, Section 875 by sending threatening messages over state lines. It seemed unreal to see the list of federal statutes. After building houses and griping about government rules for his entire adult life, my brother was suddenly facing several federal charges. Each charge carried a possible prison sentence of decades. After entering a not guilty plea on Gabriel's behalf, Mark Reynolds started arguing for bail right away. Mr. Alvarez, Your Honor, has lived in Colorado all of his life and has strong ties to the community. He is the owner and operator of a prosperous construction company with 15 employees. He is not a flight risk and has no past federal convictions. Anthony Delgado stepped forward to answer. The heavy folder of papers he carried showed how prepared he was. For a number of strong reasons, Your Honor, the government is against bail. First, Mrs. Carter was the victim of a nasty, unprovoked attack by the defendant that intentionally targeted her pregnancy. Second, the defendant has threatened Mrs. Carter, her husband, federal Judge Daniel Carter, and their unborn child several times while in federal custody. Sullivan protested. Immediately after being arrested, the purported words were made in a moment of emotion. They don't reflect true malicious intent. Anthony went on to say that the defendant's admissions show a distinct pattern of increasing aggression and a deliberate desire to exact revenge on the victims for assisting police enforcement. Furthermore, information from our inquiry indicates that this assault was not a singular occurrence. Judge Hendricks had a curious expression. Described. Anthony took out a number of documents from his folder. Several of the witnesses we spoke with detailed the defendant's lengthy history of threatening and violent behavior. In a sworn statement, his ex-wife Lucia Alvarez described instances of domestic abuse that occurred over a number of years. Threats and physical assault have been alleged by 3 former workers of the defendant's construction company. As Anthony spoke, I saw Gabriel's expression. Based on his startled looks at his client, it was evident that his lawyer was learning some of this material for the first time. Gabriel's hands were squeezed into fists on the table, and he had turned pale. Anthony added that the defendant has substantial liquid assets and the ability to escape the jurisdiction thanks to his construction company. Unusual cash withdrawals in the days after the attack are documented in bank records, indicating flight preparation. Sullivan rushed to answer. To pay employees, my client made those withdrawals, Your Honor. The construction industry needs consistent cash flow and operates on narrow margins. Over the course of 3 days, $47,000 was taken out. Anthony responded by going above and above the call of duty for payroll, based on the employment records of the organization itself. As Judge June Rise went over the papers Anthony had turned in, her face became more severe. Gabriel squirmed uneasily in his chair, throwing the same poisonous gaze back at me every now and then. At last, Judge Hendricks said, Mr. Sullivan, is your client interested in speaking to the court about bail? After a quick consultation with Gabriel, Sullivan shook his head. Your Honor, no. Excellent. After reading the accusations and the arguments put forth, I conclude that the defendant is a flight risk as well as a community danger, particularly to the victims in this case. Bail is rejected. While awaiting trial, the defendant will continue to be held in federal custody. With a finality that reverberated around the little courtroom, the gavel descended. Gabriel turned completely around to look at me as his face grew scarlet. Silently, his mouth formed words that I was glad I couldn't hear. Gabriel had one last outburst as the bailiff dragged him away. Bella, this isn't over. You believe you're protected by your husband's robe? This is not the end of it. Judge Hendricks added more time to whatever punishment he would face by holding him in contempt for the outburst. However, Gabriel's remarks followed us out of the courtroom and into the Denver sunshine like a curse. As we stood on the steps of the courtroom, I asked Anthony, how long until trial? The federal calendar is backed up, but considering the allegations and the defendant's actions, it is likely that the hearings will take 6 to 8 months, or possibly more if Sullivan attempts to postpone them. 6 to 8 months seem like a lifetime. 6 to 8 months of being aware that Gabriel was preparing retaliation, fostering animosity, and being in a federal holding facility. For 6 to 8 months, I kept checking my hair and looking over my shoulder to see whether his threats are real. I think Daniel noticed my nervousness because he drew me away while Anthony answered a call. "We will be all right," he said softly. Gabriel is imprisoned and unable to escape. Threats against judges and their families are not tolerated by the federal prison system. In there, he seemed intent on killing me. Wanting and being able to are two very distinct things, probably. Over the next few months, Gabriel will discover that federal prison is not the same as county jail. There is no place for intimidation or connections. While I attempted to regain some kind of normalcy at home, Daniel went back to his quarters that afternoon. The infant was once more active. After the hospital scare, her movements were comforting. As I walked around the home, I found myself explaining what was going on to her. Although the fetus couldn't possibly comprehend, that in some ways helped me feel less isolated. I didn't recognize the number that phoned my phone at around 3 o'clock. I responded, against my better judgment, "Bella, it's Lucia." Gabriel's wife's voice sounded worn out, as if she had been crying. Although I had heard through family channels that she had left their home and was staying with her sister, I hadn't spoken to her since the evening of Mom's party. "How are you doing, Lucia?" "Not very good. I wanted to call Gabriel to apologize for what he did, and I also wanted to let you know about something that an FBI agent instructed me not to share with family members. But I feel you should know." My stomach grew constricted. "What is it?" For weeks, Gabriel has been organizing something. He has been fixated on the notion that Daniel despises our family ever since you revealed the pregnancy. "Do you believe that you're now superior to us?" "I never consider myself superior to anyone, Lucia. I'm aware of that." That's what I attempted to tell him. However, Gabriel has changed recently, more paranoid and angry. He is certain that Daniel will somehow use his power to ruin our family. "What sort of preparation?" Lucia was silent for a while. "He has been studying Daniel and you. Online searches, public records, and court documents. He found out about cases Daniel has presided over, looking for anything he could use against him. Use it against him. How? I don't know exactly, but Gabriel's been talking about exposing corruption, proving that Daniel isn't as clean as everyone thinks. He's been collecting newspaper clippings about judicial misconduct cases, studying how other judges have been brought down. The conversation felt surreal. I'd known Gabriel resented my marriage, but the idea that he'd been conducting opposition research on my husband suggested a level of calculation I'd never attributed to him. "Did you tell the FBI agents about this?" "Yes. They took his computer and all his files." "But Bella, there's something else. Gabriel's been in contact with someone, a former federal prosecutor who was disbarred for ethics violations. This guy has a grudge against the federal court system, and he's been feeding Gabriel ideas about how to attack Daniel professionally." My hand started shaking. "What's his name?" "Richard Holloway. He was disbarred about 5 years ago for tampering with evidence in a drug case. Now he runs some kind of blog about judicial corruption." I knew that name. Richard Holloway had been a rising star in the U.S. Attorney's Office until he got caught fabricating evidence to secure convictions. Daniel had been involved in the judicial review that led to Kellerman's disparagement. The idea that Gabriel had been working with someone who had a personal vendetta against my husband made this feel much larger and more dangerous than a family dispute. "Lucia, why are you telling me this now?" "Because Gabriel's not done, even sitting in jail. He's not done. He's been making phone calls, talking to this Kellerman guy, and planning something bigger. I thought maybe if you knew, you could prepare somehow." After we hung up, I immediately called Daniel at his chambers. His assistant put me through immediately, and I could hear the concern in his voice as soon as he answered. What's wrong? I told him about Lucia's call, about Gabriel's research, and about his connection to Richard Holloway. Daniel was silent for a long time after I finished speaking. Daniel, are you there? I'm here. I'm just processing what you've told me. Richard Holloway is bad news. Bella, really bad news. If Gabriel's been working with him, this isn't just about Gabriel anymore. What do you mean? Kellerman has been waging a personal war against the federal judiciary since his disparagement. He's tried to destroy several judges' careers through trumped-up ethics complaints and manufactured scandals. The fact that he's targeted our families specifically means this was never really about Gabriel's resentment. It was about Kellerman finding a way to get to me. The pieces started falling into place with horrible clarity. Gabriel's escalating anger, his research into Daniel's background, and his seemingly calculated decision to assault me at a public family gathering where there would be maximum witnesses and maximum damage to Daniel's reputation. Are you saying Gabriel was being manipulated? I'm saying Gabriel's resentment made him the perfect weapon for someone who wanted to damage my career. Think about it, Bella. What better way to destroy a federal judge's reputation than to have his brother-in-law assault his pregnant wife at a family gathering? The scandal alone could have forced me to recuse myself from cases, damaged my standing with other judges, and maybe even led to calls for my removal from the bench. But Gabriel's in jail now. How does that help? Kellerman? Because now Kellerman has a martyr, a working-class Latino man being persecuted by the federal judicial system for standing up to an arrogant judge. Kellerman's probably already writing blog posts about prosecutorial overreach and judicial privilege. Daniel was right. I could practically see the narrative taking shape. Gabriel as the victim of an elitist system that protected its own. Daniel as the corrupt judge using federal resources to settle personal scores. Me as the privileged wife who'd forgotten her roots and betrayed her family. What do? We document everything. Every contact Gabriel's had with Kellerman. Every piece of research he conducted. Every plan they made together. Anthony Delgado needs to know about this connection immediately. Will it help Gabriel's case or hurt it? Daniel paused. It'll probably hurt it. If we can prove Gabriel was acting at Kellerman's direction, it shows premeditation and conspiracy. Instead of a family dispute that got out of hand, it becomes a calculated attack on the federal judiciary. I thought about Gabriel sitting in his cell, probably still believing he was fighting for family honor, while actually serving as a pawn in someone else's war against the federal court system. Part of me almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That evening, Anthony Delgado came to our house to discuss finest revelations. He spread documents across our dining room table like a detective working a complex case. Phone records, financial transactions, and computer forensics reports, while painting a picture of Gabriel's collaboration with Richard Holloway. The connection goes back almost 6 months, Anthony explained. Kellerman first contacted Gabriel through the construction company's website, posing as a potential client, but instead of discussing building projects, he started feeding Gabriel information about judicial ethics and federal prosecution tactics. Was Gabriel paying him? Daniel asked. No, the opposite. Kellerman was paying Gabriel small amounts at first, supposedly for consulting work on construction projects, but the payments increased as Gabriel provided more information about your family. I felt sick. My brother had literally been paid to spy on us, to gather ammunition for someone else's vendetta. Every family dinner, every casual conversation, and every piece of personal information Gabriel had access to had potentially been reported back to Kellerman. What kind of information was Gabriel providing? Anthony consulted his notes, your daily routines, social commitments, and financial information he could access through family conversations. He also provided details about your pregnancy, your medical appointments, and your relationship dynamics. He was stalking us, I said. The realization hit like a physical blow, essentially. Yes, and all of it was being directed by Kellerman, who was building a comprehensive profile of your vulnerabilities. Daniel's face had gone pale. Anthony, if Kellerman has been orchestrating this for months, Gabriel's assault might not have been the endgame. It might have been just the opening move. Agreed. which is why we're treating this as an ongoing threat to judicial security rather than an isolated domestic incident. Anthony explained that the FBI was now investigating Kellerman for conspiracy to threaten federal officials, wire fraud, and several other charges. Gabriel's cooperation, willing or unwilling, had provided them with evidence of a broader scheme to target federal judges through their family members. The good news is that this makes Gabriel's case much stronger for us, Anthony continued. Instead of arguing that he's a dangerous individual who might reoffend, we can argue that he's part of a criminal conspiracy against the federal government. That typically results in much harsher sentences. How much harsher? I asked. If we can demonstrate that the plot jeopardized government activities, Gabriel faces at least 15% of his life sentence in addition to the assault charges. As Anthony packed up his papers and left us to bear the consequences of what we had discovered, the phrase life in prison replayed in my head. Because he had been foolish enough to allow someone to turn his animosity into a weapon, Gabriel, my obnoxious, erratic, and often nasty brother, was in danger of dying in federal prison. Daniel and I talked about trial preparations and security precautions while we lay in bed that night. In addition to the brother I had lost, I was also grieving for the brother I had never truly known. I think my dream of the Gabriel who helped me with my homework and shielded me from bullies had always existed. For the right price, the genuine Gabriel might be purchased, coerced, and made to turn on his own family. Do you believe he was aware? In the dark, I asked Daniel, do you believe Gabriel realized Kellerman was taking advantage of him? Daniel was silent for a while. Gabriel, I believe, was well aware of what he was doing. He simply persuaded himself that it was appropriate. How do you know for sure? Because Gabriel had to decide that his grievances were more important than your safety and the lives of our daughters in order to choose to hurt you. Bella, no one makes that decision by accident. Because they want to, they make it. Denver slept soundly among the stars outside our bedroom window. Gabriel, however, was most likely also lying awake somewhere in a federal prison facility, knowing that his partnership with Richard Holloway had cost him everything. For the fleeting pleasure of hurting the sister who tried to love him for 32 years in spite of his harshness, he lost his freedom, his family, and his future. Additionally, Gabriel would learn firsthand how much authority the federal justice system might use to hold those who threatened its members accountable when his trial started in a few months. So far, Daniel's response had been measured and patient. However, I was starting to see that my husband's self-control wasn't a sign of weakness. Gabriel's entire life was about to change, and it was the quiet before storm. The ending was becoming apparent, but the inquiry was far from finished. The wrong family was the target of Gabriel's war declaration. He was now going to discover the consequences of attacking a person with the entire authority of the U.S. government. Gabriel had been arrested 8 months prior. In the courthouse hallway, my 3-month-old daughter Amelia was sleeping soundly next to me in her carrier. She had shown up 2 weeks early, perhaps eager to get away from the stress of my pregnancy. Before the greatest test of our life started, Daniel sat beside us and went over his notes one last time. Unusual activity for a Tuesday morning filled the federal courthouse. Due to the peculiar nature of the case, media crews had established up outside. The trial of a federal judge's brother-in-law for assault and conspiracy against the judiciary was not an ordinary occurrence. What began as a family quarrel had become a national story concerning dangers to judicial independence after Richard Holloway's arrest 3 months prior, which further increased the media's focus. Anthony Delgado, who appeared assured yet solemn, came up to us with his trial team. He had evolved into more than simply a prosecutor for us during the months of preparation. He had served as our mentor, guiding us through the intricate federal system, outlining each stage and preparing us for what lay ahead. He sat down in the chair opposite from us and asked, "How are you feeling about today?" "Ready," Daniel said. Ready, but I could tell that his jaw was tense. "Ready for this to be over?" Anthony gave a nod. Gabriel's new attorney filed one last motion this morning. Stephen Adler is trying to get the conspiracy charges dismissed, arguing that Gabriel was manipulated by Kellerman and shouldn't be held responsible for the broader scheme. Gabriel's third lawyer was Stephen Adler. After learning of Gabriel's level of collaboration with Kellerman, the first two had left the case. Even Hoffman, who was known for defending intricate federal cases, appeared to be overpowered by the evidence against his client. Any chance the judge will grant the motion? I inquired. Doubtful. Judge Martinez has reviewed all the evidence of Gabriel's voluntary participation, the payments, the planning meetings, the detailed reports Gabriel provided about your family. It's impossible to argue he was an unwilling participant. Because of her background dealing with threats against federal officials, Judge Maria Esteban had been particularly assigned to the case. She had a reputation for being extremely thorough and for not tolerating violence against public employees and their families. Although he had abstained from all engagement in the proceedings, Daniel held her in high regard. Daniel inquired, "What about Kellerman's trial?" "Scheduled for next month. His attorney is already making noise about a plea deal, which tells you how strong our case is against him. But today is about Gabriel and Gabriel alone." Along with the other onlookers, we filed inside the courtroom as the doors opened. In order to handle the media attention and the amount of witnesses Anthony intended to call, the room was bigger than the one used for Gabriel's arraignment. Mom and Dad, who appeared to have aged by years over the previous 8 months, were among the family members I saw in the exhibit. Mom looked at me and smiled weakly. She had been devastated to learn of Gabriel's plot with Kellerman and to realize that his attack on me was the result of months of preparation rather than a moment of bad judgment. It had been even more difficult for Dad, who blamed himself for failing to see Gabriel's spiral into avarice and paranoia. Federal marshals stood on either side of Gabriel as he entered through a side door. Prison had drastically altered him. He was lighter. His hair had begun to turn gray, and he walked with the deliberate, cautious gait of someone who has adapted to a hazardous situation. His face tightened into the same resentful mask I had seen at his arraignment when he saw our family in the gallery. Stephen Adler, at his side, rummaged through documents with the desperate vigor of a lawyer who realized his case was all but lost. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Gabriel, Hoffman's task was to minimize the harm and find a way to shorten his client's punishment from decades to only years. With the authority of someone who has overseen hundreds of federal cases, Judge Martinez summoned the court to order. Despite being a petite woman in her 50s, her presence filled the courtroom. She opened with, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are about to hear evidence in the case of the United States versus Gabriel Alvarez. The defendant is charged with assault on an immediate family member of a federal official, conspiracy to threaten federal officials, and interstate threatening communications. These are serious federal crimes that strike at the heart of our judicial system." Anthony Delgado stood up to make his opening remarks, outlining the government's case in a composed yet firm manner. He portrayed Gabriel as someone who had permitted his anger to be used as a weapon by a discredited former prosecutor who had a grudge against the federal judiciary. "Over the course of this trial," Anthony stated, "you will hear evidence that Gabriel Alvarez didn't simply lose his temper at a family gathering. He executed a months-long plan developed in cooperation with Richard Holloway to assault his pregnant sister in the most public and damaging way possible. This wasn't a family dispute. It was an attack on the independence of our federal courts. From Kellerman's first interaction with Gabriel until the assault at Mom's birthday party, Anthony took the jury through the chronology. He presented them with transcripts of their phone conversations, copies of the cash Gabriel had received, and comprehensive plans to target the relatives of other judges that had been discovered on Gabriel's computer. Anthony went on, "The defendant will say he was manipulated, that he was a victim of Richard Holloway's scheme. But the evidence will show that Gabriel Alvarez was a willing and eager participant who saw an opportunity to get paid for his resentment. He chose money over family. He chose violence over decency. And he chose to target a pregnant woman because he knew it would cause maximum damage to her husband's career." Stephen Adler stood up for the opening defense when Anthony was done. He was an accomplished lawyer who tried his best to make Gabriel seem like a victim of Kellerman's deception. However, I could see the jury's disbelief even as he spoke. Gabriel's involvement was too voluntary, and the evidence was too obvious for the manipulation defense to be very persuasive. Gabriel Alvarez made a terrible mistake, admitted Hoffman. But he was groomed by a sophisticated con artist who exploited his legitimate concerns about his sister's marriage to orchestrate an attack on the federal judiciary. My client is guilty of poor judgment in allowing his emotions to be manipulated, but he is not guilty of the conspiracy the government alleges. Lucia was the first witness Anthony phoned. While Gabriel was in federal custody, his ex-wife filed for divorce, claiming that they couldn't agree and that she was afraid for her safety. As she was sworn in, she avoided making eye contact with Gabriel and proceeded reluctantly to the witness stand. "Mrs. Alvarez," Anthony said, "can you describe your former husband's behavior in the months leading up to the assault on his sister?" Lucia's description of Gabriel's fixation on Daniel and me was hardly audible above a whisper. The calls with Richard Holloway in the middle of the night, the investigation of Daniel court history, the growing anxiety about being despised by federal authorities. Gabriel became convinced that Judge Carter was using his position to investigate our family. Lucia gave evidence. He thought every routine interaction with government agencies was part of some conspiracy against him. When Bella got pregnant, he saw it as proof that she'd completely abandoned her family for her husband's world. Did you ever hear Gabriel and Richard Holloway discuss plans to harm Mrs. Carter? Judge Martinez overruled Hoffman's objection. For the first time since she took the stand, Lucia turned to face Gabriel. "Yes. About 2 months before the party, I overheard Gabriel on the phone talking about creating a public incident that would force Judge Carter to recuse himself from cases. They talked about focusing on Bella in particular because she was vulnerable due to her pregnancy and because harming a pregnant lady would provoke the most uproar." As Gabriel's cheeks turned red, he yelled angrily into his lawyer's ear. Hoffman requested a short break so he could speak with his client, but the harm had already been done. According to Lucia's evidence, Daniel's judicial career was intentionally harmed by the premeditated assault. FBI agent Naomi Park was the next witness, and she took the jury through the evidence that was retrieved from Gabriel's phone and computer records. There was a lengthy and incriminating communication trail with Kellerman. Emails detailing ways to counteract federal intervention, texts addressing the judge problem, and comprehensive surveillance reports on our everyday activities. The words Agent Chun, Anthony said, "In your investigation, did you find evidence that Mr. Alvarez was conducting surveillance on his sister and her husband?" "Yes. We recovered hundreds of photographs taken from public locations near the Carter residence, detailed logs of their comings and goings, and notes about their security measures. Mr. Alvarez had been watching them for months." The courtroom was filled with screens showing the pictures. Pictures of Daniel and I heading to doctor's appointments, going out to dinner, then departing for work. It was terrifying how methodical the surveillance was, transforming routine activities into proof of Gabriel's infatuation. Did Mr. Alvarez share this surveillance information with Richard Holloway? Yes. We have records of regular reports sent to Kellerman, including photographs and detailed schedules. Mr. Alvarez was essentially functioning as a paid informant, providing intelligence about a federal judge and his family to someone with a known vendetta against the federal judiciary. Agent Chin's testimony was accurate and damaging, but Stephen Adler's cross-examination concentrated on attempting to prove that Gabriel had been tricked into the surveillance. Gabriel was not a bewildered victim, but rather an engaged and cooperative participant, according to the evidence. Richard Holloway himself was the key witness for the prosecution. The discredited former prosecutor had consented to collaborate with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence 3 months into his own federal incarceration. After spending months in federal jail, his once impressive appearance was dimmed when he entered the courtroom in shackles. Kellerman gave a heartbreaking testimony. He explained his strategy of utilizing Gabriel as a weapon against Daniel in particular and targeting federal judges through their families. He acknowledged that over the course of 6 months, he paid Gabriel more than $15,000 for intelligence gathering and eventual violence rather than building labor. Kellerman's testimony was flat and matter-of-fact. I identified Gabriel Alvarez as someone with existing resentment toward his brother-in-law, Kellerman said. Family dynamics made him the perfect inside source. His willingness to accept payment for information told me he could be convinced to take more direct action. Did you specifically instruct Mr. Alvarez to assault his pregnant sister? Inquired Anthony. Not in those exact words, but I made it clear that a public incident involving the judge's pregnant wife would create maximum damage to his reputation and potentially force his recusal from sensitive cases. Gabriel understood what I was asking for. How did you communicate this understanding? Gabriel suggested targeting his sister's pregnancy himself. He said attacking a pregnant woman would generate the kind of outrage that would destroy the judge's credibility. I encouraged this line of thinking and provided additional payment to incentivize action. When Kellerman's comments took hold, the courtroom fell silent. Gabriel had not been coerced into acting violently. He had been the one to propose that the best approach to harm Daniel's career would be to focus on my pregnancy. The assault's planning was far more terrifying than I had anticipated. Hoffman attempted to paint Kellerman as an untrustworthy witness with personal interests during cross-examination. But everything of his testimony was backed up by the documented proof. The conspiracy accusations were firmly established by phone records, financial records, and Gabriel's own correspondence with Kellerman. Mr. Kellerman, replied Hoffman, isn't it true that you're testifying against my client in exchange for a reduced sentence in your own case? Yes. And isn't it possible that you're exaggerating my client's role to minimize your own responsibility? No. If anything, I'm understating Gabriel's enthusiasm for the plan. He was eager to hurt his sister and damage the judge. I simply provided him with a framework and financial incentive. I experienced a well-known mixture of anxiety and resolve when it came time for me to testify. Daniel's mother was watching Amelia at the courtroom daycare center, so I could concentrate entirely on this last run-in with Gabriel. Anthony's inquiries were direct and intended to determine how Gabriel's attack affected my family and me. I talked about the emotional trauma, the physical agony, and the worry for my daughter's safety that came with being attacked by my own brother during what ought to have been a celebration. Mrs. Carter, replied Anthony, prior to your mother's birthday party, were you aware that your brother had been in contact with Richard Holloway? No. I had no idea Gabriel was being paid to spy on my family or that he was planning to hurt me. How has this experience affected your relationship with your extended family? I turned to see Mom and Dad sitting in the gallery, their faces twisted with guilt and sorrow. It's destroyed relationships that took 32 years to build. My parents blamed themselves for not recognizing Gabriel's behavior earlier. Extended family members have taken sides. What was supposed to be the happiest time in my life, expecting my first child, became a nightmare of surveillance and violence. Cross-examination by Stephen Adler was mild yet incisive. He attempted to prove that Gabriel had been troubled from the beginning and that his mental health conditions may have made him more vulnerable to Kellerman's manipulation. However, I declined to offer justifications for Gabriel's decisions. Mrs. Carter, replied Hoffman, would you agree that your brother has struggled with anger management issues throughout his life? Gabriel has always been volatile, I said in response. But volatility isn't the same as calculated cruelty. Taking money to spy on your family and then assaulting your pregnant sister isn't a mental health episode. It's a deliberate choice. But if Gabriel was suffering from paranoia or other psychological issues, might that have affected his judgment? Gabriel's judgment was clear enough to negotiate payment rates with Richard Holloway. It was clear enough to plan surveillance operations. It was clear enough to target my pregnancy, specifically because he knew it would cause maximum damage. Those aren't the actions of someone with impaired judgment. They're the actions of someone who chose money and revenge over family. Dr. Laura Kim, the last witness, spoke about the health risks Gabriel's assault had put Amelia and me at. Everyone in the courtroom was reminded of Gabriel's near-death experience by her composed, expert explanation of the risks of placental abruption, early labor, and fetal mortality. In your medical opinion, Anthony responded, what was the most likely outcome if Mr. Alvarez's assault had been slightly more severe? Death or severe brain damage to the fetus and potentially life-threatening hemorrhaging for the mother. Abdominal trauma during pregnancy can have catastrophic consequences. Anthony Delgado portrayed Gabriel during closing arguments as having broken all family ties and morality out of greed and resentment. He reminded the jury that months of preparation and monitoring had led to Gabriel's assault, not a moment of bad judgment. Gabriel Alvarez didn't just attack his pregnant sister, Anthony said in his conclusion. He attacked the independence of our federal judiciary. He allowed his resentment to be weaponized by enemies of our legal system. The defendant in this case chose money over family, violence over words, and conspiracy over conscience. The evidence demands conviction on all counts. Stephen Adler made an impassioned but ultimately pointless closing speech. He portrayed Gabriel as a man who had been duped by a cunning criminal, whose justifiable complaints had been taken advantage of. However, there was too much proof of Gabriel's voluntary involvement for the manipulation defense to hold up. Gabriel Alvarez made bad decisions, Hoffman admitted, but Richard Halloway, a cunning con artist who took advantage of familial turmoil to further his personal grudge against the federal government, cultivated and influenced him. Gabriel must take responsibility for his conduct, but those repercussions have to be appropriate given that he was manipulated rather than the mastermind of a plot. Less than 3 hours were spent deliberating by the jury. Their foreman declared guilty verdicts on all counts when they got back. As the judgments were announced, Gabriel remained emotionless, but I noticed a tiny hunch in his shoulder, as though he was finally realizing the seriousness of what he had done. Although Gabriel's sentencing was set for the following month, Judge Martinez made it apparent that he would be serving a lengthy jail sentence. If he survived, the required minimum penalties for federal conspiracy charges would have kept him behind bars well into his 60 seconds. I saw Gabriel in person for the first time since that awful day at Mom's party as the courtroom began to empty. He gave me one more look as the federal marshals got ready to bring him back to his detention cell. Silently, "I hope it was worth it," he said. I briefly believed that he was expressing regret and admitting the cost his decisions had caused his family. Then I understood that he was referring to my marriage to Daniel and implied that our contentment had somehow validated his behavior. It was, I said, meeting his gaze directly. Gabriel's face contorted with the same venom I had witnessed during the trial as he said, "Every day of my life with Daniel and Amelia is worth more than all the resentment you've been carrying around for 8 years. Without further word, the marshals escorted him away. I had a strong sense of closure as I watched my brother vanish through the courthouse doors. The quiet calm that results from knowing that justice has been done, not joy or contentment. In the corridor, Daniel discovered me still clutching Amelia, who had slept soundly through the decision. He put his arms around both of us, and I felt totally protected for the first time in 8 months. "It's over," he muttered. "It's over," I concurred. However, I was certain that Gabriel's sentencing would only be the first step in our family's recovery as we left the federal courthouse and entered the Denver sunshine. It would take time for the wounds caused by violence and betrayal to heal, and some relationships might never fully recover. Nevertheless, I knew we had escaped the worst that Gabriel and his cronies could do as I gazed at my daughter's serene face and felt my husband's steady presence at my side. We would confront dangers to our family, marriage, and safety and come out stronger than before. By shielding its officials and their families from those who would use violence to subvert the rule of law, the federal judicial system had fulfilled its duty. It was now our turn to rebuild the life Gabriel had worked so hard to ruin. The morning sun shone through the windows of our new house in the foothills outside of Denver, where Gabriel had been sentenced 2 years earlier. Daniel was grilling brunch on the deck as Amelia, who is now 2.5 years old, chased our golden retriever Luna through the backyard. After everything we'd been through, the symphony of normalcy that was generated by her laughing and the mountain breeze still felt wonderful. With one hand on my expanding tummy, I watched my family from the kitchen window. This pregnancy had been everything the first one wasn't, and our second daughter was due in 3 months. Peaceful, joyous, and encircled by love rather than danger and monitoring. Though she wasn't totally sure what being a big sister would entail beyond getting to assist with choosing baby items, Amelia was thrilled about the prospect. Architectural blueprints for the Family Justice Center we were constructing in downtown Denver were spread out on the kitchen table. Daniel and I had made the decision to turn Gabriel's trial into a positive event. 4 families facing domestic abuse and threats from inside their own social circles. The Bella and Daniel Carter Center for Family Justice would offer safe housing, counseling, and legal assistance. When Daniel returned from the terrace with a dish of pancakes, he added, "The contractor says the main building will be finished by Christmas. Perfect timing for the grand opening." Dr. Foster, the therapist who had assisted me in processing my own trauma and would now be the center's clinical director, believes we'll have a waiting list from day one. I responded. It seems that more families are coping with internal threats than previously thought. From a modest concept, the center has expanded into a full-fledged establishment. In order to help law enforcement identify family-based threats to public officials, we collaborated with the FBI to develop training programs. We had collaborated with federal prosecutors to create procedures for dealing with situations in which family members were used as weapons against public servants. Above all, we had established a secure environment for victims who were torn between surviving and falling in love. Amelia's dark locks bounced as she jumped into the kitchen. She had inherited both my obstinate nature and Daniel's eyes, which kept us both entertained and sometimes worn out. Her voice was solemn as she declared, "Mama, Luna ate a butterfly." Daniel scooped Amelia onto his lap and started chopping her pancakes into exact squares, using the same methodical approach he applied to everything from bedtime routines to court decisions. "Should we call the doctor?" "I think Luna will be fine, sweetheart. Butterflies are probably like vitamins for dogs." I was always reminded of why I had fell in love with him in the first place when I watched him with our daughter. His kindness, his moral character, and his capacity to bring order out of chaos. When the phone rang, Anthony Delgado's name appeared. He was on our Justice Center's advisory board and had been a personal friend during Gabriel's prosecution. His calls typically contained updates on the ongoing investigation into Richard Holloway's network or positive news about the center's success. Anthony said, "Bella, I have news about Gabriel," without introducing himself. His appeal was denied by the 10th Circuit. The conviction and sentence are final. A familiar mixture of relief and melancholy washed over me. Gabriel was given a 23-year sentence with the potential of release after 15 years in federal prison. His legal team had tried every possible appeal, citing everything from prosecutorial misconduct to incompetent counsel. It hadn't worked. He had conspired with Kellerman, and the proof was too strong. His attack on me is too well known. His threats were too direct. Even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know, I inquired, "How's he doing in prison?" His counselor claims that he is at last taking ownership of his behavior, working in the jail library, and taking part in anger management classes. Though it's too soon to know, it's possible that he has truly changed. Applying the word change to Gabriel felt odd. His bitterness, his erratic behavior, and his urge to place the blame for his troubles on other people had characterized him for 34 years. It seemed nearly unthinkable that federal prison may have achieved what decades of family intervention had failed to. As he asked about making contact through his attorney, yes, he'd like to write to you and your parents. No demands, no expectations of forgiveness, just acknowledgement of what he did and acceptance of the consequences. I glanced at Amelia, who was now using her pancake squares to construct intricate structures as she described the fundamentals of architecture to Luna. Growing up, my daughter would be aware that her uncle was incarcerated. However, she would also grow up in a society where her parents had changed violence into advocacy for others and trauma into purpose. Telling Anthony, "I'm not ready for that yet. Maybe someday, but not yet." Completely understandable. The offer remains open when and if you ever change your mind. Amelia played in the living room as Daniel and I discussed Gabriel after Anthony hung up. Over time, these discussions had gotten easier, less weighed down by immediate dread, and more centered on philosophical issues pertaining to forgiveness, justice, and familial ties. Daniel questioned, "Do you think he's really changed?" I think prison is probably the first place Gabriel's ever faced real consequences for his behavior. No family members to make excuses, no money to solve problems, no ability to intimidate or manipulate. Maybe the kind of accountability does change people. And if it has, if Gabriel genuinely becomes a different person, I took this into account carefully. Then I'm glad for him and for his potential future victims who won't exist because he learned control. But that doesn't erase what he did to us. Redemption doesn't require forgiveness from the people you hurt. Daniel gave a contemplative nod. He had learned from his tenure on the federal bench that individuals may be both truly terrible and genuinely changed, sometimes in the same lifetime. Because Gabriel's situation featured family ties that were difficult to break, such as court cases, it had been especially difficult. I traveled to my parents' place in Lakewood later that afternoon for our monthly meal. It had changed significantly since Gabriel's incarceration. Our chats now had a depth and honesty that had been lacking for years because Gabriel's parents had both gone to therapy to confront their responsibilities in enabling his behavior. Although Mom welcomed me at the door with her customary zeal, I could see how much the previous 2 years had worn her down. She was much older. Now her hair was all silver. Her eyes were indelibly marked with lines of concern, as though accepting Gabriel's fate had relieved a load he had been bearing for decades. Dad appeared older as well, but in some ways more at ease. Mom exclaimed, "How's our granddaughter?" as she quickly reached for my belly to feel for movement. "Active. I think she's going to be a soccer player like Amelia wants to be." We sat down to have homemade empanadas and iced tea in the living room. We had been doing the same thing for years, but this time there was no anxiety from knowing when Gabriel would show up and ruin everything. Our connections have developed in unexpected ways because of the lack of that fear. Anthony Delgado called this morning. I responded. Gabriel's appeal was denied. Dad gave a slow nod. We knew it would be. His lawyer prepared us for that outcome months ago. How you feel about it? A look that conveyed years of complex emotions was shared between Mom and Dad. They had learned to accept consequences rather than avoid them, acquired perspective on their own parenting shortcomings, and lost a son to his own decisions. Mom said, relieved at last. I know that sounds terrible, but I'm relieved that Gabriel can't hurt anyone else. Can't hurt you, or the girls, or Daniel. Can't destroy what you've built together. Dad went on. I wish things had been different. I wish we'd gotten Gabriel help when he was younger, before the anger became so deep, but wishing doesn't change what happened. Now we focus on being the best grandparents we can be. We discussed the Justice Center, Amelia's impending birthday celebration, and preparations for the arrival of the new baby. We had never been able to have a normal family discourse while Gabriel's instability dominated every get-together. Relationships have been able to blossom and repair because of his absence. I reflected on the journey that had led us to this moment as I drove home through places I knew well. Although Gabriel's attack had been heartbreaking, it had also demonstrated my marriage's resilience, the effectiveness of the legal system when used appropriately, and my own ability to survive and change. In 6 months, the Justice Center was supposed to open. We had already received requests from families across facing comparable circumstances shortly after the birth of our second daughter. Federal workers whose family members were recruited by extremist organizations. Judges whose relatives had been singled out by criminal groups. Service members whose spouses had been spied on by foreign operatives. The recurring theme remained constant. Resentment-tainted love, family ties used as weapons by outside forces, and victims torn between survival and devotion. In order to address these dangers and maintain any relationships that could be salvaged, our center would offer a framework. Amelia asked the question that had become a nightly ritual as Daniel and I tucked her into bed that night. Will Uncle Gabriel ever come home? Probably not for a very long time, sweetheart. Uncle Gabriel made some very bad choices and has to stay in a special place where he can learn to make better ones. But you still love him? Answering the question never became any simpler. How can you explain to a 2-year-old that safety and love can occasionally need making different decisions? That reconciliation is not always the result of forgiveness. That even when family members are unable to be together, family ties can endure. I said, I love the good parts of Uncle Gabriel, with thought. The brother who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework. But I can't be around the parts of him that hurt people. Sometimes loving someone means protecting yourself and your family from their bad choices. Like how we don't let Luna in the kitchen when she's muddy. But we still love her. Exactly like that. Daniel switched on Amelia's nightlight and gave her a forehead kiss. The customary actions of a father who would never assume that sleep was a safe time. We had discovered that the calm of today was sufficient, but we had also learnt not to count on a tranquil tomorrow. Daniel opened the security system on his tablet in our own bedroom, examining cameras and sensors with the same meticulous attention to detail that he applied to judicial review. Although Gabriel's incarceration had eliminated the immediate threat, the increased security had become routine after his warnings. He placed his hand lightly on my stomach as we got into bed, and he asked, "Any regrets? About Gabriel's sentence? About the trial? About how everything unfolded? About any of it, all of it?" I gave this great thought. I regret that Gabriel chose the path he did. I regret that our daughters will grow up knowing their uncle as a cautionary tale rather than a beloved family member. I regret that mom and dad had to learn about their parenting failures so late in life. But I don't regret that Gabriel faced consequences for his actions. I don't regret that we fought back instead of accepting abuse as normal family dysfunction. I don't regret that we're using our experience to help other families avoid what we went through. The sound of my voice caused the baby to move violently. Her little kicks are comforting in their typical manner. This daughter would grow up in a society where her father's status was viewed with respect rather than as a danger, where family get-togethers were a time for celebration rather than observation, where boundaries safeguarded love instead of allowing it to be weakened. Richard Holloway's sentencing is next month, Daniel stated. Anthony thinks he'll get 15 to 20 years. No one had grasped at first how vast Kellerman's network had become. He had disclosed ties to other disgraced lawyers, criminal groups, and even foreign agents who were looking to undermine the American legal system during his plea negotiations. Gabriel had been but one tool in a toolbox intended to strike federal institutions at their weakest spots. Will that be the end of it? The end of this particular threat, yes. But people like Kellerman will always exist. There will always be someone looking for ways to weaponize family relationships against public officials. That's why the work we're doing at the center is so important. 6 months later, Amelia cut the ribbon during the grand opening ceremony of the Williams Center for Family Justice, and I was carrying our newborn daughter, Isabella, in the foyer. It was a stunning structure that was intended. But chế độ hỗ trợ trình đọc màn hình. Để bật chế độ hỗ trợ đọc màn hình, nhấn trên Internet Z để tìm hiểu thêm về các phím tắt. Nhấn cho dấu ngoặc trao. Thông báo bị ẩn. Tìm và thay thế. Tìm 128 trong tổng số 131. Out of vibrant blocks, she had acquired Daniel's meticulous construction method to feel less like an institutional setting and more like a cozy home. There was plenty of room for kids to play while their parents had services, along with natural materials and soft lighting. Federal judges, FBI agents, prosecutors, and dozens of families who had previously benefited from our pre-opening services were among the guests. In his keynote speech, Anthony Delgado described the center as a model for tackling new risks to public safety and judicial independence. Bella and Daniel Carter transformed their own trauma into a beacon of hope for others. They refused to let violence define their story, choosing instead to write a new chapter focused on healing and protection. I ended myself in the children's playroom after the wedding, where I observed Amelia assisting other children in creating intricate constructions out of vibrant blocks. She had acquired Daniel's meticulous construction methods, meticulously designing every addition before it was put in place, but she had also inherited my unyielding will, which kept her going when a tower threatened to collapse. She's going to be a remarkable woman, Dr. Foster stated as he joined me by the window. She already is. Both of them are. Isabella slept soundly in my arms, unaware of the festivities for her birth and the inauguration of the center. She had arrived with the same quiet resolve that had marked our family's recuperation from Gabriel's attack, having been born during a blizzard that had closed down most of Denver. Dr. Foster inquired kindly, "Any word from Gabriel lately?" "He sent a card. I think he's finally realizing that redemption doesn't require a relationship with the people you hurt." "How's that feel?" "Peaceful. For the first time in my adult life, I don't have to worry about Gabriel's reaction to my choices. I don't have to control his emotions or make excuses for his behavior. I can just focus on being a wife, mother, and advocate. When Isabella was born, just congratulations." Daniel discovered me in the playroom silence as the evening wore on and the guests started to depart. Emilia had dozed out in a stack of stuffed animals, worn out from the thrill of being the life of the party. "Are you prepared to return home?" he asked, carefully lifting Emilia into his arms. "Ready." Driving through Denver, we passed the federal courthouse where Gabriel's trial had been held, the hospital where Isabella was born, and all the landmarks along the way, from advocates to survivors to victims, with the city lights reflecting off the snow-capped mountains, providing the ideal setting for contemplating the distance we had come. "Do you believe Gabriel ever thought it would turn out this way?" As we parked in our driveway, Daniel inquired. "I believe Gabriel thought I would be the one to be destroyed. He most likely believed that attacking me would ruin your job and our marriage and leave me feeling alone and heartbroken. Rather, he provided us with a greater purpose, pushed us to discover our own strength, and set the stage for us to assist hundreds of other families. Gabriel's attack had been intended to destroy our family, but in the end, it had made us stronger, more purposeful, and more a part of something greater than our own happiness. I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from transforming suffering into service as we carried our sleeping daughters inside and placed them in their beds. As Daniel and I stood on our bedroom balcony that evening, gazing up at the stars over the Rockies, I reflected on the letter Gabriel had sent announcing Isabella's birth. It contained no pleas for forgiveness or attempts at manipulation, just a straightforward recognition of the changes our family had undergone in spite of his attempts to destroy it. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he had wrote, "but I hope someday my nieces will know that their father is a good man who married a strong woman, and that they come from people who turn darkness into light." Perhaps his time in prison had changed him, or perhaps he had finally gotten weary of carrying so much hatred. But whatever the case, Gabriel's words had offered me something I hadn't anticipated: closure. It was the first thing he had ever written that sounded like true wisdom rather than self-pity. Long after Gabriel's release from prison, long after Kellerman's network was completely dismantled, long after our own daughters were grown and making their own decisions about justice, family, and loyalty, the Williams Center for Family Justice would continue to serve families for decades to come. And every family that a war found refuge in its walls would serve as a testament to the straightforward fact that violence meant to destroy can become the ray foundation for something beautiful, something healing, something that makes the world a little bit safer for everyone. It was an awakening, a raw pulse of human truth wrapped in whispered secrets and veiled emotions. Every word is a shard of fractured reality. Every sentence is a bridge between worlds seen and unseen, between the light of revelation and the dark abyss of what remains unsaid. And as this story slowly fades into the quiet places where memory and mystery converge, know that it was never just a story. These digital confessions whispered into the void where anonymity becomes the mask for truth, and every viewer becomes the keeper of secrets too heavy to carry alone. Stories breathe their most powerful magic here, igniting the deepest chambers of your soul, provoking the buried desires, the unspoken fears, and the fragile hopes that cling to your heart like fragile embers. And now that secret, that shuddering echo of someone else's reality, becomes a part of your own shadowed story, blending with your thoughts and igniting that unquenchable curiosity. The unquenchable desire to know what is beyond, what mysteries linger just out of reach, waiting for you to solve them, what stories have not yet been told. Hold on to this sensation, this electric thread of wonder and apprehension, for it is what binds us all together in the vast, invisible web of human experience. If your heart is pounding and your thoughts are consumed by the what-ifs and the may, then you know that the story is finished, that its magic has become woven into your very being. So, before you leave this world, keep this in mind. Every story you read here is a whispered call to look closer, listen more intently, and embrace both the light and the dark. If you were lost or found yourself changed in any way, then honor this connection by keeping the flame burning. We don't just tell stories here, we summon them. We become vessels for the forgotten, the hidden, and the unspoken. And you, dear listener, have become a part of this sacred ritual. If the story haunted you, like this video, subscribe to join the fellowship of seekers who pursue the unseen truths. And ring the bell to be the first to greet the next confession, the next shadow, the next revelation waiting to rise from the depths. Keep your heart open, your senses keen, and never stop searching for the whispers in the silence until the next story finds you in the peaceful hours. Thank you for watching. Be careful. Good luck. Asterisk. Everyone has a different journey in life, and we all attempt to understand the world in our own way. Each day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories that connect us all. After listening to today's story, you may have some new questions or some old memories that have returned. These kinds of events serve as a reminder that we are all human, happy, sad, and always learning something new. If you like this article, please tell your friends about it. We always appreciate your feedback and views since they inspire us to produce even better material. Stories like these help us realize that everyone's journey in life is different, and we learn something new by hearing other people's stories. Each story has its own distinct angle, and our aim is to comprehend everyone's perspective and make our content diverse and approachable. We value your experiences, so please share your own stories with us. If you like this video, please leave a comment. We want to make sure that our content always makes you think and gives you new ideas. If you've already seen this video, your comments are still valued because we can use each one to make it better and give our viewers a different viewpoint. This video was merely an example of how we try to connect with others through storytelling and learning about different sides of life, and we hope to continue sharing such stories that help us all learn and grow together. What we saw today was only a small part of the many stories shared on Reddit and around the world, serving as a reminder of how we all attempt to understand life by sharing our experiences with one another. We appreciate you taking the time to read this. And if you haven't already, please like and follow for more incredible material. Your support keeps us running, and we will work to bring you more emotional and thought-provoking stories in the future.